I came. I saw. I did some research. I wrote jokes. I found a bunch of funny pictures. And then I made a video. This is the Roman Empire. Rome was officially made an empire when Augustus did the thing with the stuff and the power, but Rome was effectively an empire long before it actually had an emperor. Roman territory stretched outside Italy as early as the 3rd century BCE. The only thing that really changed between the Republic and the Empire were a few name tags, to be honest. If you've seen the video I did on the Roman Republic, you'll know that Augustus came into power at the tail end of a century that had about 10 too many civil wars for my liking. His official title was Princeps, which may sound like prince, but really it means first citizen. Yes, Augustus was the first to be that asshole in the YouTube comments section who says first, which actually makes him double first. Whoa. Meta. The Roman Empire is probably one of the most easily sortable in all of history, and this makes my job very easy. You can sort by the type of government. Augustus' principate lasted for a commendable 200-some-odd years, whereupon, after a midnight crisis in which the empire almost fell apart, was replaced with the not as commendable Dominate until the empire's end. When it comes to Roman imperial history, call me a filthy hipster because I like their early stuff. I find it easiest, though, to sort by dynasty because that's pretty much how everyone else does it, and since I'm also a hipster, I should ironically be a sheep as well. Following Augustus was the Julio-Claudian Dynasty. Out of 4 emperors, 3 were totally crazy, and that's not exactly a strong start. Tiberius, though generally peaceful, was paranoid and had several people and a few kitchen utensils tried for treason. Caligula, whose name means little boots in Latin, oh how adorable, was insane. He sent an army to Britain to try and kill Neptune, but diverted his army to France to collect seashells instead at the last minute, and he also once tried to appoint his horse to the Roman Senate. Caligula was also a huge fan of Game of Thrones. If you've heard of method acting, Caligula was a method viewer. He not only had incestuous relationships with 3 of his sisters, he often had people assassinated. The freaky part here is that afterwards he would call those people he had assassinated to come see him in his palace, and then when no one showed up, he would chuckle and joke that they must have killed themselves. Okay, so 2 of those 4 things were genuinely funny. One was weird but not unheard of, and the last one was absolutely insane. Caligula was assassinated in 41 CE and replaced by Claudius. Claudius was the most sane of the emperors in this dynasty, and he was a pretty good emperor by most metrics. He expanded the empire and smoothed out some kinks in the political system. Also, though, his wife cheated on him and he had her killed. I said he was the sane one, but I didn't say by how much of a margin. Last in this dynasty was Nero, who was properly crazy. In his early years, Nero built athletic buildings and theaters, he won a war, and he was a pretty skilled diplomat. He also thought his mom was a helicopter parent, so he had her killed. Like I said, it's all about those early years when it comes to Romans. Nero also built the Domus Aurea, or Golden House, after a fire in 68 BCE, which many believe Nero started himself in order to clear the land for the palace. Nero was ultimately driven into exile and committed suicide while Caligula giggled in the underworld. Fun fact, Tiberius, Claudius, and Nero all have the same full name, Tiberius Claudius Nero. I hope that bothers you as much as it bothers me, because it really bothers me. Following the civil war that was known as the Year of 4 Emperors between 68 and 69 CE, Vespasian became emperor and kicked off the Flavian Dynasty. Nero, who had a bad habit of burning down Rome to make expensive palaces, really did not leave a great place for Vespasian to work with. So Vespasian had a lot of economic cleanup and construction work to do. The most notable construction project he had was the Flavian Amphitheater, which you may know as the Colosseum. It was called the Flavian Amphitheater because it was named after Vespasian's Flavian Dynasty, and also because the inaugural first performance there was given by rapper Flavius Flav. The military was also in shambles following the recent civil war, so Vespasian slapped the military with some reforms and it was pretty much good as new. Vespasian was also very attentive to matters in the provinces away from Rome itself, and he did much to make those provinces more hospitable for the people who lived there. Historians universally praise Vespasian as being a pretty cool dude. Following him was the very short and tragic reign of his son Titus. Titus was great, but he had a precarious relationship with fire. In his first year as emperor, Bastille released their hit single Pompeii, and Rome also burned again. Romans loved Titus because he was so generous with the rebuilding process. He died of an illness 2 years after becoming emperor in 81 CE. Following Titus was his brother Domitian, who was paranoid. The Senate didn't much care for most of the emperors, but they hated Domitian, so they had him killed. The next line of emperors was an adoptive, not hereditary dynasty, and it's known as the period of the 5 good emperors because there were 5 emperors who were good. Like I said, historians are not creative. These emperors were all pretty cool guys who, for the most part, generally made Rome a very prosperous and peaceful place. The first emperor was Nerva, who thought it would be a good idea to cut the Senate into the decision-making process. Smart move. The Emperor Trajan is most well known for his conquests in Dacia. Trajan expanded Roman borders way the hell eastward to the Persian Gulf, which is the farthest they would ever be. Following Trajan was Hadrian, who, instead of pushing Rome's luck and expanding, said, "I think we're good," and went about securing the borders that were already there. The most notable border securing came during his tour of Britain. When he got to the edge of Roman Britain and saw the Scots, he said, "Aw, hell no," and built Hadrian's Wall immediately. Antonius Pius came next, and he didn't really do anything of note. He just mostly kept things floating in good working order, which honestly is pretty commendable because, let's be real, half of Roman emperors were actually able to do that. Following him is Marcus Aurelius, who was all sorts of awesome. He won a war against Parthia, fended off Germanic tribes, wrote philosophy, and managed the empire excellently. His administrative and legal prowess served Rome very well for the 20 years he had in power. Marcus Aurelius was the first of the 5 good emperors who had a son that could replace him rather than adopt a son, so his son Commodus became emperor following his death. And it's a shame, too. Marcus Aurelius was so great, but his son Commodus was absolutely awful. He was co-emperor with his father for the last 3 years of his reign and started out as a pretty prudent emperor until an assassination attempt made him go paranoid as well. Wow, a lot of Ozzy Osbourne fans here tonight. From there, Commodus became a textbook megalomaniac and was known to compete in gladiatorial games. And by compete, I mean that everyone who faced him would surrender immediately because he's kind of the emperor, and Commodus was, not the kind of guy to let you off if you happen to stab him. Commodus also had wounded and crippled Romans placed in the arena for him to slaughter. Commodus also charged Rome 1 million sesterces per appearance in the arena. Not a nice guy. It was under Commodus that the Pax Romana, which was the 2 centuries of general peace following Augustus, came to an end and Rome began its decline. Commodus was assassinated by Russell Crowe in 192 CE. After Commodus came 2 other guys who were pretty much irrelevant, so we're going to skip them. The next half-century brought the Severan Dynasty, and since it's slowly downhill from here, I'm going to pretty much breeze through these guys. We have Septimus Severus, who fought the Parthians and the Barbarians, Caracalla, who was briefly co-emperor with his brother, Geta, who was assassinated by his brother Caracalla, Elagabalus, who offered half of Rome to the doctor that could perform a sex change operation on him, and finally Alexander Severus, who pissed off his troops so much that they killed him. The killing of Alexander Severus triggered the great crisis of the 3rd century that I alluded to earlier. Since Rome was without an emperor, generals applied for the position aggressively. Applying to college was tricky, but at least no one got stabbed. During this kerfuffle, there were 26 different people who at some point decided that they were emperor. While the generals were too busy faffing about and killing each other in Rome, the edges of the empire became subject to attacks from barbarian tribes in the west and Persians in the east. Also, there was a plague. And also, years of artificially inflating the Roman currency to pay the army finally resulted in an economic collapse. Also, internal trade fell apart and commerce became far more localized. That's also bad. But this is history summarized, not economics summarized. So on we trot. By 268, the empire was split between the Eastern Palmyrene Empire, the Northern Gallic Empire, and what remained of the Roman Empire. The seceding empires insisted that it isn't a phase, Mom! But they were reunited with Rome proper about 5 minutes later when Aurelian slapped some sense into the dissenting empires with some freshly caught whoop-ass. The crisis officially ended when Diocletian enacted his reforms after becoming emperor in 284. Diocletian referred to himself as Domine, not Princeps as the emperors before him did, so the Roman period after Diocletian is referred to as the Dominate. Diocletian did a very good job of stabilizing Rome economically and politically following the crisis. He was also a pretty big fan of delegation, so he created the Tetrarchy, in which Rome had 4 emperors, each of whom ruled over a different quadrant of the empire. The Tetrarchy lasted about 20 years until it collapsed and Constantine stepped in as emperor. If you want to know more about what he did, you can have a look here. I'm going to breeze over most of the empire's decline from here because I want you to like the good parts of Rome because I happen to like Rome and want you to know the interesting bits and not the bits where it all falls apart. The Valentinian Dynasty was a thing for about 30 minutes during which the Romans and the Goths started getting very, very not amicable. The last big Roman dynasty was the Theodosian Dynasty. For the most part, all the emperors from here on out are completely irrelevant because the military controlled just about everything. The generals were too busy with what I can only assume was a tea party to put up a fight when those pesky barbarians kicked out the last Roman emperor and started their own kingdom in Italy. For the interested, the events surrounding the fall of the Roman Empire are covered extensively in the documentary The Last Legion. Just kidding, that movie sucks.